Good evening, my friends, and welcome to Moments with the Master. My name is Albert Dixon, and I am the preacher at the Mill Road Church in Cincinnati, Ohio. And with me is my good friend John Henry, who is the preacher at the Church of Christ in St. Leon, Indiana. And we're the host of the program, and we look forward to studying with you, and we invite you to join us. And if you have any questions or comments, you'll be provided information or that opportunity to ask those questions, to make those comments at the end of the program, as well as additional information on how you can reach us and the times of services where we preach and work with the congregation. And we invite you to come and join us if you are in the area. And also subscribe to the program as well. And it will notify when the program is about ready to begin, as well as trying to contact us, and also if you want more information in regards to tracks or that kind of information, that you can contact us, and that's what we want you to do. Make the comments, ask the questions. We would love to hear from you. John, we have been studying the book of Leviticus. We looked at chapter 10 with the Nadab and Abihu being consumed because of their disobedience. And then we looked at chapter 11. We started that study. And in chapter 11, we were seeing where God is making a distinction between the things that are clean and unclean. And there in chapter 11, especially in the first few verses, we were kind of looking at the predatory birds, basically, the animals in that chapter, or excuse me, not the predatory birds, but the animals with the split hoofs and so forth, the animals that can be consumed for food. And God gives a description of that in those passages. And then we got down to the unclean, and it started with the predatory birds there in verse 13. And so as we continue to look through some of the things that are mentioned here, John, again, I think the overall picture, as we have been pointing out, is God making that distinction between such things. And I believe at the end of the chapter, it kind of gives you the reasons why. As you look at the last few verses of the chapter, like verses 41 and towards the end, number one, God called them detestable. And because God called them detestable, that's what they are. And it's because he said so. And then he goes on to say in verse 44, he says, "For I am the Lord your God, consecrate yourselves therefore, and be holy, for I am holy, and you shall not make yourselves unclean with any of the swarming things that swarm on the earth." After he talked about what those swarming things, then he points out about his nature, his character. That's why they were not to do that in reference to it. And then he says, "I am the Lord that brought you up out from the land of Egypt to be your God." And it's because he is the deliverer. He delivered them. He saved them. They didn't save themselves. So really, they belong to him. So he points that out. That's why they're not to eat of these things. And then he finally points out there in verse 47 to make a distinction between the unclean and the clean, the things that are edible and the things or the creatures that are not to be eaten. So you see, this is why.
And, like he was saying, and I concur with what you said. I had been studying it today and looked at the end of and especially in verse 44 when he says, "I am the Lord your God, and ye shall therefore sanctify yourself, and ye shall be holy, for I am holy." Again, I know we probably, mentioned it last week, but just to kind of review, in 1 Peter uses this, this same idea of being holy and pure and sanctified because God is that way. Right. And so he commands us even today to be the same way, holy and pure. And we've been sanctified through the Holy Spirit when we obey the gospel and have our sins washed away. So we're set aside, and we are now ready to be used by God as a vessel to good works. Right. And that's what we have to do here, carry those things out. 1 John chapter 3 and verse 3 points that out. And 1 John 1 and verses 1 through 5 teaches us that Christians have been called into fellowship with God. And, this idea that we're looking at in these chapters 11 through 15 have to do with purity. And God is a pure God and a holy God. And, it's teaching us once again that we have to be the same way. If we want to have fellowship with God, and this is what's going on here. If you don't do what God said, there's clean and unclean.
Right.
And even when we get to the New Testament, God talks about sin as being, clean or unclean. Sin, of course, is unclean. But doing what God wants would be doing what is righteous or clean.
Right.
And so those distinctions are used throughout the Bible in that particular sense. And so that's just something that, I saw there as we come to an end of, end of that book and move on to, chapter 12.
Right, yeah. Chapter 12 deals with the motherhood and, a woman giving childbirth, and also in compliance with the instructions that God had given to Abraham, the law of circumcision. Mm-hmm. And the aspect of a woman giving birth and the purification process that she's to go through. And if it's a male, talking about him being circumcised the 8th day. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was very interesting, John, because a lot of the things that are being stated are really in accordance to some of the medical things that have been pointed out through time as doctors and scientists have investigated some of these things. And you see these instructions given that fit right within that time frame for these things to happen.
Well, they said that, I've read that doctors have said that, male circumcision is something that benefits the male for purity reasons, cleanliness. And so, like you're saying, there's a lot of things in here that are given to teach personal hygiene, I guess, right. And through that you keep yourself pure in that sense.
Right, absolutely.
So, and like you said, it's interesting for a boy, 7 days; for a girl, it's twice as long, 14 days. Mm-hmm. And the limitations that were put on the mother for 32 days, I think. She was unclean, and for the young man, it was, or for the young lady, it was more. I think it was 36. There was a difference of 4 days of her being unclean when she gave birth to the. Let's see here. It says she bears a female child in verse 5. She'll be unclean 2 weeks. She shall continue in the blood of her purification 60, that's 30, and 6 day 36. And for the boy, it was 32. And so, and again, I know we've talked about this in the past, and you had brought this up about God making provisions because, after this was done, there was a sacrifice. Well, lo and behold, what do we see? Well, God made provisions. If you couldn't bring a lamb, then you could offer a turtle dove. If you couldn't offer turtle doves, then he said you could bring 2 young pigeons and give to the priest for the atoning. So, that is carried out again, this idea of, a sacrifice is still going. You might not have the lamb, but some kind of sacrifice.
Right.
And God makes the provision to where even if it's, something, because to a poor person, that would probably mean a lot.
Right.
And so I thought that was easy. Not easy, but,
just, you could kind of comprehend and see those kinds of things of how God set that up for them. Another thing that I picked up too with this, for example, you could see the time for healing.
Yes.
with the woman giving birth. So yes, she has this time to heal, as well as the idea of being considered the days of her purification. That means the healing process is
Right.
taking place with her. Then another thing that I found out, John, with the male being circumcised after 8 days, it's doctors have found that's when the blood clotting system starts to really start to work.
I see.
And so when the male is circumcised, the blood would be able to clot for him to keep him from bleeding to death. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah, you see.
I knew about the other part, but I didn't know about that.
Yeah, it's within the blood. There's that the K that causes the clotting for the circulatory system here. And it's interesting that God's commands and instructions are right within those, in the framework of all of that. But at the same time, these provisions that God is making, as we pointed out, for the poor, for the female with the time to heal, and so forth. And it's showing how, again, God caring for his people.
And, if we jump ahead over to the New Testament, you've got Joseph and Mary. And when she had Jesus, and they have to keep the law.
Right.
And so these things are carried out just like they're written right here in the law.
Right.
In the book of Leviticus here. So
absolutely.
I think that's an important thing because, they were righteous people.
Right.
Holy, and she gave birth to the Son of God, and they carried out the law.
Right.
And then, of course, she would have went through her time of purification. We know that Joseph, even though he was married, had no relationship with her in a physical, sexual sense, but that came later.
Right.
And then, she began to bear other children, of course.
Yes. So that, John, that I see that also dispelling some of the myths and concepts of some people thinking that, number one, when you're dealing with the religion that God has revealed in His Word, that these are not Neanderthal or backwards thinking. No, these things are consistent, and there is no conflict with science and what the Bible is revealing. Yeah. In fact, you see the harmony. And anytime you do see a miracle that takes place, yes, God exerting power over the force of nature, again, that's still consistent with what we see in God's power and God ruling over His creation. Some very good things here, even here in chapter 12, concerning the book of Leviticus and seeing its harmony and impact and consistency.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, the time frame around this would have been around 3,500 years?
Somewhere around there.
Ago, if I'm not, I don't remember exactly. I know it's 2,000 to 2,000 years back to 2020, but then after that, I was thinking it was about another 1,500, maybe a little less than that. Right. But anyhow, it gives us a general idea how old these things are.
Right.
But yet, modern science and doctors, physicians, finding out a lot of this stuff, and have found out, of course, over the years, that what is written here about the the body and the keeping the body pure and holy, and is true. It's all true as far as the functions of the body is concerned.
Yes, that's right.
And so he's trying to teach them that, and the whole thing to me has always been interesting.
Yes.
Because here's God, and God is our maker and creator, and who else to instruct us better than the God who created us?
That's right.
And tell us about the physical body, and that's what he's doing here.
Right.
And sometimes people reject it, but you can say that the Bible, I mean, people say all kinds of things, let me put it that way, anymore. They say anything. Right. But the thing of it is, around 3,500 years ago, that this stuff was being written down, and I would tend to think that, this would even go back all the way to the beginning of creation with Adam after they come out of the Garden of Eden, mm-hmm. that when God spoke to the patriarchs, that he would have begun to teach them right. these kinds of things, but because of man's own ignorance and not wanting to continue to walk in God's way and just go over and be immoral, it's we see that in today's society. Right. We've seen it throughout the generations, throughout history of man, where if you violate God's laws of purification in some way, just like we could use like fornication or adultery, a lot of times there's a big consequences of that, the diseases that one can get from things like that, but yet God tells us in His Word, okay, this is the way I design things, and if you do it this way, here's the beauty of it, here's the purity of it. Right. But we don't want to listen.
Right, and along with that, John, you could, as you're pointing out, I thought it's a very good point, because if we walk away from God's instruction, now you have all of the death and destruction that takes place with that. Even though these things are in our world because of the consequences of sin. Mm-hmm. But God is giving them guidance on how to deal with the circumstances of which they live. And man did that by disobedience. And as you're pointing out, walking away from God, you actually are groping in the dark for things. And if you don't have your shoes on, how you stub your toe on something, and that hurts, especially the pinky toe, as we would say. But to prevent from groping in the dark like that, what do? You turn the light on so you can see and avoid. Your chances of stubbing your toe is lessened. That doesn't mean that you're not going to stub your toe. It just means that the chances of that happening is it's a lower percentage of it happening. And so God's wisdom and God's guidance navigates us, or helps us to navigate through the challenges that we face in life and the things that we have to deal with.
Right.
And this is one of them. Think about mistreating a woman after giving birth. It could lead to all kinds of health consequences. Right. And destruction, and even slow the progress of a growing family.
Sure.
And she is a part of the family because she's a very important part of the family.
I think that's a good point. People might not like to be that open, I guess, in a discussion, but that's correct. The woman's body needs time to heal.
Right.
And her husband needs to let her heal.
Yes.
Like you said, if not, it's going, could really probably do her a lot of harm.
Right.
Yeah. So, in that sense, if you want to go on, the next two chapters have to do with leprosy. Yes. Mm-hmm. Now, they're long chapters. I mean, if you look in the Bible, they're not short. But both of these chapters are simply talking about leprosy, not, the disease was a very dreaded disease, we know. It would eat away like cancer at the skin.
Absolutely.
One of the things I read in a dictionary, Bible dictionary, it says that, and I'll quote this, many believe the word leprosy was broad enough to include anything from psoriasis to elephantitis to leprosy. The description seems to indicate a variety of skin diseases, skin eruptions, including leprosy, but also including other skin diseases. And so here was somebody who suspected that they might have this disease coming, and God said, what you need to do is you need to go to the priest. Now that's always interesting too, because all of a sudden the priest becomes a doctor.
Right, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, God had, somewhere they had to get education, the priest did, to look at this, because if a person had it, they had to go to the priest. They couldn't look at it at themselves, I reckon, because it seems to me that they always had to go to the priest and have that looked at. And then there was different things. Sometimes they would keep them there enclosed for so many days, and then bring them out and look at them to see. Now, if it didn't spread no more anything, they could be, clean. And if not, then if there were other signs, if you want to read those chapters, it'll tell you, those 2 chapters about the skin, color, what happens underneath the skin, the secretion, even the hair color that's in the discoloration of the skin, or then sometimes they can just be boils. But from what I could gather, that in reading those chapters, that sometimes even boils can lead into leprosy, and they have to be looked at. They have to be checked by the priest. And of course, we know that in the times of Christ, they had to cover themselves.
Right.
Remember, Jesus had talked to the lepers and healed a bunch of them. Right. And everywhere they went, the Bible said they had to holler, unclean, unclean. Well, we can understand why. It was such a terrible disease, and that was to warn everybody to stay away, or to get away, keep a safe distance from these people, so that you don't contract this awful disease.
Right.
Because it was really, really awful.
Right.
When one had it. Yeah. So the priest had to make a judgment about all this. And another thing is, of course, the priest was the expert in the law. Now, that being so, I don't know if that's because it was written in the law, or, all these things are written in the law. We have a copy of it today, but I would imagine, tell me if I'm wrong, but back then, when things were being written on scrolls, it was the Levites, the priests, that would study them. And then, because you think about, around 5 million people coming out of Egypt, there was not enough to hang, there wouldn't have been enough to circulate, as far as something like that. So they had to be written in the law, and another thing that would be for future generations to make reference to, because those priests would have to go back, study the law, and say, okay, well, now here's what God did. He left us this information about, of leprosy. And just to read, the pulpit commentary described disease like this. It said, the first symptoms of the malady is a painless spot which covers an indolent ulcer. This ulcer may continue unprogressive for months or for years, during which the person affected is able to do his ordinary business. But at the end of these periods, whether longer or shorter, it produces a more repulsive and foul disfigurement of the human face and frame than any known disease. The features of the face changing their character, part of the body occasionally mortifying and dropping off. Death at last comes suddenly when a vital part of the body has been afflicted. And that's awful. Can you imagine the pain of leprosy? Walking around with this disease and body parts and your arm fall off, and it would be an ugly thing to see. Also horrifying to see people with leprosy out, even though you was away from them. Right. I remember years ago. Well, it's been a long time ago. It was a really old movie I believe it was a biblical movie, but I can remember maybe it was Jesus or something going over to where the lepers were out in no man's land. I don't know what to call it, but anyway, there was kind of like when he got there was kind of like it wasn't really a pit, but the ground had just went down, and as he stood up there were all these lepers down in there, and that's where they went to commune because they all had leprosy, and they was covered up, and he, it's like I said, it was just a movie, but it might give us a picture, an idea of some of this stuff. Of what's going on. So.
As you were mentioning about the disfiguring aspects of leprosy, and you can begin to see really that I oftentimes think, John, and have done and read where some of the scholars have associate this as leprosy is sort of like a type of sin.
Oh, yeah.
And how sin does that. It affects us. There are consequences. We can be cleansed of it, but at the same time, it does leave there are consequences to sin. So leprosy is like that. So, and the thing is the people that were afflicted by leprosy, because of how contagious it was, absolutely, they had to be separated from everyone else. So that no one else get afflicted. You start to see a lot of lessons in New Testament teachings about how congregations are to deal with sin among those who are practicing it among them, that they are to separate themselves from individuals that are engaging in sin so that others do not become affected by it. And so leprosy back here in Leviticus chapter 13 and 14, you could see this was a very serious matter. And as individuals were determined to have it, they had to go through the next step. And then if the person wasn't severely, if it had been just a skin rash that was contained and it healed, but it may have left a scar, from the healing process. So all of these guidance that God is giving for the priest, when he looks at that, to make sure that it wasn't something that was spreading that could affect everyone else.
Now, I was thinking about, leprosy, and the Apostle Paul in 2 Timothy 2:15 talks about studying the Bible. And then verse 16, he said, "But shun profane and vain babblings, for they will increase unto the more ungodliness, and their word will eat as doth a canker, of whom is Hymenaeus and Philetus, who concerning the truth averred, saying that the resurrection is past already, and overthrown the faith of some. Nevertheless, the foundation of God standeth sure, having this seal. The Lord knoweth them that are his, and let everyone that nameth the name of Christ depart from iniquity." Now, a lot of times I've heard people describe this word canker as cancer or leprosy.
Right, yeah. That's right. Yeah.
Their word, it says, "and their word will eat as doth a canker, of whom," but literally he's referring to sin. And that's why you was talking, and I thought about it. I just wanted to bring that up because I thought that was interesting.
Absolutely.
That, I'm just telling you how I've noticed it used at different times. Cancer, leprosy, gangrene.
Right, yes.
There's different names used for it, but as you read in the encyclopedia, it can cover a broad, as I read that section there.
Absolutely.
So,
and that doesn't mean, now, understand what we're saying is, that doesn't mean that individual is sinful because they have...
Oh, yes, right.
But we were pointing out how the impact of leprosy is similar to how sin would be in the individual or a group of people. If individuals do not make the necessary changes in their lives, they can affect others to fall away from God.
It's just like, remember Jesus had told the disciples, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees.
Right, absolutely.
Well, he's not talking about unleavened bread, but he's using those words to make a point. The word leaven was representing sin,
Right.
and he said, this, and it's the same idea, like you're saying, same idea here. That's what Paul's doing,
Right.
with this word, leprosy or cancer, whatever, however you want to define it. So I think it's. Might have to do this next week.
Yeah. Whoa, yes. See how much time has flown by. And I hope that you will join us next week, my friend, as we continue our study in the book of Leviticus. And I hope that you're seeing the interesting things that are there. But in the meantime, may God bless you as you continue to study His Word.